Here are the 5 biggest strength training mistakes that my athletes make when lifting, as well as mistakes that I've made as a coach coaching my athletes. So let's dive into what they are, the biggest fixes for them, so you can avoid making these mistakes and become the best athlete that you can be. So let's do it. And first, I think it's always valuable just to reiterate the importance of getting these things right and avoiding these mistakes, because strength in sports is the foundation of robustness, or basically staying healthy. And strength is going to set the stage for the qualities above it on this pyramid of power and speed. So if you are making these mistakes, you are not only increasing your risk of injury, but you are also not achieving the highest level of performance that you could possibly have. The first mistake is simply just underloading yourself when lifting, which is not pushing the intensity high enough or not getting close enough to failure as you need to be. And the simple fix for this is just this idea called reps in reserve, or at the end of the set, when you stop, how many more reps could you have done with perfect form? And the good news is that you can make gains for not only hypertrophy, but also strength from 0, 1, 2, or 3 reps from failure. So if you are underloading, then that means that when you stop the set, you could have done 4 or more reps if you had to keep going. And the 2 examples that I have here were 2 upperclassmen on my college baseball team that I was working with. And this example on top, in week number 4, he jumped 120 kilos. That's over 260 pounds from his first set to his last set, which means that those first 2 sets didn't even count. Those were basically just more warm-up sets. And if I knew that, in this example, he could hit 220 kilos, well, week 1, he only got up to 120, which means that whole week was basically just a warm-up. So he didn't even get anything challenging or stimulating enough until maybe the last 2 sets of maybe week 3 and week 4. And the example below this was an athlete who for 4 weeks straight had the exact same set 1, 2, 3, and 4, which means that week 1 and 2 might have been challenging, but as they got stronger and progressed over the course of 4 weeks, weeks 3 and week 4 were not simply challenging enough. So in order to get gains, we have to challenge ourselves, get close enough to failure, and reps in reserve, shooting for 0, 1, 2, or 3 is a great way to do that. And on the flip side, with this reps in reserve concept, athletes can also overload themselves or do basically too much too soon. So although we do want to get 3 reps or less from failure, 0 to 3, we can't spend too much time or all of our time in that 0 to 1 kind of rep in reserve, almost failure range. So with training in progress, because it's a long-term play, we have to get easy gains first so we can get the hard gains later. So basically, if we can get gains at 2 or 3 reps in reserve, so not that close to failure, but still challenging, well, then we have something to progress to in the later weeks, going from 2 to 3 reps in reserve to something a little bit harder, like 1 to 2, and then progressing from there, going, close to failure in that 0 to 1 kind of range. And the story that I have of this is, similar to my athletes underloading themselves over multiple weeks. This was week 2 of off season of a college athlete of mine, and they'd been working hard the whole year, and it's finally time to just train for 10 to 12 weeks throughout the spring and the end of the school year. And we had 4 sets of 5 reps of trap bar deadlift, which is a decent amount of reps, and they only got 4 reps on week 2. It was like their first set. So basically they had maxed out their high volume trap bar deadlift on week 2 of like 10 to 12 weeks of training. So if we're turning that knob all the way up of intensity and proximity to failure, well, you can't go past failure anymore, right? Because that's what failure is. So where are we supposed to go for the next 8, 9, 10 weeks of training? Just as we can use reps in reserve for combating understimulating and under-challenging ourselves, we can use reps in reserve to combat and be a little bit more intentional about not overloading or doing too much too soon. I describe it more kind of how I have in the previous examples of like 1 to 2 is like basically failure, or you don't know if you could do 1 more. 1 to 2 is you could for sure do 1 more, maybe 2, and 2 to 3 is where you know that you have a few more, but it's definitely starting to get kind of hard. And here I have some examples because this is subjective and this is a skill that you have to improve at over time, whether it's an athlete feeling your own RIR or whether it's a coach watching your athletes and kind of guessing what their RIR is. So first I have this super high level athlete doing a triple for back squat. And I just want you to watch kind of rep 1 to 2 to 3, how easy it looks at the bottom, how fast or not it comes up, how much time is in between the reps, just knowing that there's all these other things that you can look at besides simply just the speed of the bar. And here's the last rep right here. And we saw with this athlete a little bit of a form breakdown with the butt coming up a little bit before the chest. It definitely got a little bit slower. So I would say maybe this was 1 rep in reserve, so I'd probably call us at the 0 to 1 kind of range. And next we have an athlete doing 4 RDLs. Let's just watch. First rep looks pretty nice. That one was a little bit slower. Then we see a pause before that last rep, and that was definitely the slowest one. So I would say he probably had 1 to 2 more reps in the tank or kind of good reps before failure. And now we have a triple of deadlift. Crazy fast for 1, crazy fast for 2, crazy fast for 3, where obviously I'm going to go up to that athlete. They could have done for sure 3 more. Hey, go up. They'll look super good. You have my blessing to add more weight to the bar. And then the last video that I have is an athlete doing 5 reps. So that was 1, 2, and although none of these reps look particularly fast or explosive, there wasn't really a drop off in the speed or the form. And I would have guessed that this athlete could have done 2 or 3 more if they had to. So just some visual examples of what I mean with reps in reserve and how to guide putting some weight on the bar, maybe even taking some weight off. Mistake number 3 is the lack of plyometrics and honestly just doing athletic things. And that is the most unique constraint of sports, is that sports have a time constraint. You have to get to the ball before the other person does. You have to get to the base before the ball gets there and just things like that. Versus in lifting, powerlifters can grind out a heavy squat over however many seconds it takes, right? 5, 7, 9 seconds to do a squat. So plyometrics and weighted jumps or weighted plyometrics are an awesome way to bridge that gap between heavy, slow lifting and more realistic game-like conditions of unresisted, super fast athletic things. So the fix for this is at the beginning of every lift, pairing a weighted jump, whether it's dumbbells or barbells, with a body weight jump, which could be hurdle jumps, box jumps or anything kind of like that. And I just have a few examples here. First is just some barbell jumps, looking at the speed of the jump, super light. I think this was less than 135 pounds. So this was maybe 100 to 115. Then we have some repeat hurdle jumps. Again, time constraint, get off the ground as fast as possible, being athletic. And then if you have a little bit less equipment in this third video, simply just stepping off a box, gathering yourself and exploding upwards. So pairing a weighted jump or a weighted plyometric with a bodyweight plyometric, 2 to 4 sets at the beginning of your lift is a super nice addition to help be more athletic and kind of bridge that gap between regular lifting and sports. Mistake number 4 is lifting like a bodybuilder. Now, there is a lot to be said. I've learned a lot of these things and concepts and ideas from bodybuilders. I've made podcasts about this, but there are factors and variables that bodybuilders don't have to take into account that athletes do. And the main thing is soreness. Bodybuilders don't care if they get sore, for example, in their chest after a chest day, because they don't have to use their chest at all until, 2 or 3 days later when it's time to hit chest again. Versus in a throwing sport like baseball, let's say, they have to use their chest every single day to throw the ball, right? So to be better at sports, as a sports performance coach, I will be the first person to admit that to get better at sports, you have to sport more and sport better. So how does lifting and strength training complement that, or basically just not get in the way of our sports-specific skill development? And the main thing that we are going to be avoiding, as I already alluded to, is soreness. Well, how do they structure their training, not caring about soreness? And then how do we avoid those things and structure it in a little bit more smart and intelligent of a way to help the athlete sport more and sport better? And this is basically just shifting to total body training. So a traditional bro split or bodybuilding split would be you do all of your legs on one day, all of your push, so it's going to be chest, shoulders, triceps, and then all of your pull on day 3, which is going to be your back and your biceps. which you smoke those muscles that day, but then you don't have to touch them for the next 2 or 3 days. So in a 3-day split, like I said, you do 1/3 of everything per day, but you add that up over 3 days, then you still get the total of everything. And even on a 4-day split, you can have an upper and a lower emphasis, but if you have an upper focus day, then you toss in your lower body accessories. And then when you have a lower body focus day, you toss in your upper body accessories. So you're still doing a little bit of everything every day, but you dilute it down over 4 days. So there's not as much soreness per day, but in the total week of training, you're still getting all of it done, if not a little bit more. And mistake number 5 is under fueling. And this is literally just physics and the law of thermodynamics that you cannot make gains. You cannot put more mass and tissue on your body if your body literally doesn't have the extra energy and the right kind of energy to do so. So basically enough calories and enough protein. And the story of this is when I got into my little bodybuilding phase in grad school, a classmate of mine was a competitive bodybuilder. And I said, hey, we work out super hard 6 days a week. I don't want to leave any gains on the table, but I'm not crazy. I'm not going to track my food, right? Like I knew everything. And he said, hey, just track your food for like 3 days. Let's just get an idea of how much protein you're eating and how many calories you're eating, right? Because you have to be in a calorie surplus to put on some muscle, and you need enough protein to help support that. And after 1 day of tracking, I was not getting enough calories in, and I was significantly under and not getting enough protein in. So I think when you actually know how much calories and how much protein you need, it is super humbling and a little bit harder than you would think. And just as hard as it is to lose weight, I would argue, especially for athletes, it's just as hard to put on weight because you have to replace the calories of not only practicing 5 to 7 days a week, but also the lifting, and then also a little bit on top of that. So I'm not a nutritionist, but the rule of thumb that is out there is eating at least 0.7 grams of protein per pound of body weight, all the way up to 1 gram per pound of body weight. So for example, I weigh 200 pounds, so 0.7 would be 140, and then 1 gram per pound would be 200. So as long as I'm eating between 140 and 200 grams of protein, then that's a pretty good place to start. And if you're trying to put on more muscle, then get to the upper end of that. So that's just a general rule of thumb to follow. The fix for this is to track your food for a week and see how you line up. Because I think it's one thing to say, oh, I'm for sure doing it. I have 1 protein shake every day, versus what do the numbers actually say? And if you do this and you're under and you try to fix it and it's just hard and you just don't know what to do, then consult a professional, look up, sports nutritionist or something kind of like that with the actual licensure and certifications to help you out. So the action items, wrapping this up, is to first get better at using RIR as a loading guide. So RIR is very subjective. How many reps you felt like you could have done if you had to keep going. How many reps you felt like you had in the tank. So it is not a perfect science, but you'll get better at it over time with, imagine if you have 4 sets of squats, 4 sets of bench, 4 sets of pull-ups. That's 12 opportunities for you just to feel and practice and guess what your RIR would have been. So just get better at using that and developing that skill. Second is do athletic things at the beginning of your lift. It can be 3 dumbbell jumps plus 3 box jumps, 2 to 4 sets. You can knock that out in 10 minutes tops to, like I said, help bridge that gap between traditional slow lifting and the body weight, unresisted, super fast athletic things that sport requires. Lift like an athlete. This is going to be total body lifting. So over the course of a week, you can still get a lot of stuff done, but you're not going to accumulate as much daily soreness along the way. And last is fuel appropriately and fuel enough. So those are the 5 biggest mistakes I see my athletes make, with some anecdotes in there and the fixes for them as well. So hopefully you have some real, simple, actionable advice to become the best athlete that you can be. So happy lifting.